Hello everybody! Today we are going to be painting a galaxy far, far away. So I got my kit all out, and I like to just put all my layers together just so I can kind of see what I'm working with. This one's quite fun. I included quite a few different little pieces here, so you can really have fun and make this piece your own, and you can use as much or as little of these pieces as you'd like. So for my setup here, I just have a piece of paper underneath my kit, and this is so when I start to paint my edges, I'm not getting my table too covered in paint. I have a little palette for mixing. This is actually an old plastic lid, so like a plastic ice cream container lid or a margarine container works really good for this. The other thing is tin foil. You could use wax paper if you don't actually have a palette. I got my colors here. This is our wood glue, and then our stick for that's one of our last steps, and then our string. So we'll just set those aside for now. And then we are going to need just a jar of water. I just use an old pickle jar or a jam jar. You don't really want to use a cup from your kitchen just because the rim is going to get quite covered as you wash and clean your brush. So it's nice just to have an old jar or something that you don't want to reuse in your kitchen later. And then the one other thing I like to have is just a pencil. Okay, well, let's get right into this. So I'm just gonna move all my little extras just to the side for now, because we'll start with base coating our back coat here, final layer. So before we start, I just like to line up these two layers, and with the pencil, I like to just do a little outline. With the trees, this might be a little bit more difficult, but just kind of a general marking, just so we can see what's actually going to be showing when we paint. So as you can see, the trees come up to about here, which means everything down in this area you're not going to be able to see, so we won't waste too much time applying paint there just because you won't be able to notice it. We will bring the paint right to the bottom of these mountains just because in between the trees we want to make sure we have some good coverage there. So, and then it's nice to see where your frame comes to on your side here, because then you don't have to go right to the edges, so we make a little bit less of a mess. Perfect. So I'm going to start by just opening up all of my paint colors. And then we will start by painting the sky in the background. Now, feel free to get creative with your sky. You can do any crazy color you'd like. You can actually do patterns, like I've done ones with polka dots, or yeah, any sort of a pattern there. I am going to do just a standard sky just so I can teach you guys how to blend, but feel free to get creative, and you don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to start by putting just a good little heap of blue on my palette. And then I always like to wash and clean my brush in between grabbing more color. So we got the blue. I'm going to put, a little bit of green, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of black and a little bit of white. So we'll just put these on here. There we go. And I like to keep all my colors separate and then slowly mix my colors. So I know that I'm gonna want to start with a darker blue, and then so we're gonna start with a darker blue and then work our way to a bit of a lighter blue up against the mountains there. So with our darker blue, I'm just gonna grab just a little chunk of that blue. I'm gonna grab the smallest amount of black. So just the very corner of my brush has some black in it. And then I'm going to grab just a little bit of white, and I'm going to mix all these together and see what tone I get. And then you can adjust, adding more of any color that you need. But it's nice to start with just small amounts, just so you don't go too crazy, especially when you're using black. Black is just a very potent color. I'm going to go a little darker than this. I'm looking for something almost like a navy, so just got a little more black in there. Let's see. Yeah, that's the color I'm looking for there. So once you have the color that you're happy with, and whatever color you end up wanting to use, you always just start with a darker tone on the top, a medium tone in the middle, and then a lighter tone on the bottom. So I got my dark tone here, and I'm gonna add a little bit of water just to make it a bit more fluid. And I'm gonna start by just following along this pencil line. And you're gonna wanna make sure you go over the pencil line by, I would say, at least 1/4 of an inch, just to make sure you got a nice amount of coverage. And we want to just make sure we have a nice coat of our darkest color all along the top. And for the medium color, I used up most of the color here, which is actually pretty perfect, just because there's just a little bit of residue left here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab some blue and some white and mix it right in with here, and just to see what kind of a tone I get, just because I usually like to add a little bit of black even with our medium tone. And one thing I'm going to do to make this blue a little bit more interesting, I'm going to grab a little bit of my green. So if you can see there, it's just going to make it a little bit more of a turquoisey tone. And it's just going to look quite nice up against our navy color there. And that's looking pretty good. I might add just a little bit more white, just to lighten it up a little bit. And then once you get a color that you're happy with, what we're going to do is we're going to come and just run our paint just until it meets our darker color. So just follow along. And add a little water as you go. Make sure you got your edges right up and over that little pencil line. Perfect. And then once you have your medium color all ready to go, we're gonna wash the paint off of our brush. I patted it on my paper towel, but I still want this wet to the touch. So dip it back in, and you want it not dripping wet, but you want it pretty damp. And then I'm gonna take my wet brush, there's no paint on my brush right now, and I'm gonna start going back and forth in my dark color, and I'm gonna slowly go down into my medium color and just work that in back and forth. And what the water is gonna do is it's gonna just take the paint from the medium color and just spread it quite faintly over the darker color, and that's how we're going to get a really nice blend. So just keep working back and forth. And if it's quite dry, just go back and dip your brush again and start with your darker color, working your way down into your medium color. And just keep going back and forth until you get a really nice blend. And then that's looking pretty good. So we just wanted to blend so we didn't have a really hard line between the two colors. And lots of water is key to making this happen. So if you're not getting a really good blend, just add a little bit more water and keep working it back and forth and until you get something that you're happy with. That's looking pretty good. And then we're gonna do our lighter color. So I'm gonna just wash my brush off and I'm gonna grab just a little bit more white for my little white area here. So I'm gonna grab all the white that I had hanging out there and mix it in, and then I'm gonna grab, I think I'm gonna need a little bit more from my supply. I'm gonna grab a little bit of blue and a little bit of green as well, just because we have a nice amount of surface to color here. So we want this to be just a tone lighter than what we just worked with. And that's looking pretty good. And you can always bring your brush over here and just kind of test out between the two. And I'm thinking that's looking pretty good. Yeah, perfect. So up against our mountains here, we're gonna just want to kind of take it slow and use the end of your brush to just slowly bring the paint right up against the mountains. And if you want to switch to your smaller brush, you can get more of a finer detail. You could switch to your smaller brush if you're more comfortable with that. So just bring the paint right up to that engraved line of the mountain. And then also bring it just to meet that medium color along here. Add a little water as you go. Awesome. So once we have paint all the way up to your mountain, and then also meeting our medium color here, we're gonna do the exact same thing we just did above. So I'm gonna wash my brush off. I'm gonna put my brush in the area of my medium, and I'm gonna start working it back and forth and down and into the lighter color. lots of water, just keep working that in. I'm just gonna move my little brush out of the way there. Perfect. And if you end up having like a little bit more of a solid line here than you'd like, it's just a matter of dipping in with a little bit more paint, and you can just work it all the way through. And you can even mix a little bit of a darker color and then slowly mix some back and forth as well. So it's really just playing around with blending all these colors together until you get something that you're happy with. And that's looking pretty good. I think I'm gonna leave mine about here. I don't like to do the background on this one too detailed just because we have so much going on in the foreground. I really want that to be the focus, and this is more just a nice background to really set the scene. Awesome, so I am happy with that. So I'm going to wash my brush off, and then next we will paint these mountains. I still have some black and some white here, so I'm gonna take a little bit of my black and I'm gonna take all of this white and I'm gonna mix a medium gray for my mountains. Oh, that's a little bit dark, so I'm just gonna try to get as much paint as I can off the brush before washing it. And grab another hunk of white and then keep mixing white in until you get a tone that you're happy with for your mountains. I like to go with it with a medium gray. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm liking that. You can always test it out on here. Yeah, so I'm gonna do this nice medium gray. So now here is all about just following along the lines. So all of these lines here that go right up against the edge, we are gonna paint those white so it looks like a little snow-capped mountain. So I'm gonna just do all my large areas with my big brush, and then I'm gonna switch to my little brush just to make this a little bit easier. So I'm just my large open areas. I'm just gonna that's probably about it. So switch to my small brush here. And this is all about just taking your time and going right up to those engraved lines. And don't worry too much if you do end up going over little bits here and there. we'll be going over the other side with the white, so we can always touch up when we do the other side. So yeah, don't worry too much if you go over a little bit. If you end up running out of gray, just get your brush back here and we'll mix a little bit more. A little bit more white. Just gonna grab a big hunk of white because we got quite a bit of gray base coating coming up here. So let's see what we got here. Touch lighter than I had before, so just add a little more black. Oh, and I just painted the wrong part gray. So don't worry if you end up doing that. It's nice and easy to paint that over white later. We all make mistakes. Or maybe you want it all to be gray and you don't want any white on your mountain. That works as well. then once you have all of your gray filled in, we'll go in and we'll do either white, or you could do even a lighter, just a lighter gray to give it a little bit of contrast on the tops of all these mountains here. So I'm gonna do a very light gray, so I'm just gonna pull in my white. So an almost white, but with just a touch of that gray mixed in. And then, yeah, just slowly follow along. And you go right up to those engraved lines. And I'm just adding little bits of water as I go to my paint, and that just makes it a little bit more fluid, and then it allows you to get a really nice fine point on your brush as well. And if you missed any parts or you went over on any parts, it's a good time to, when you're done all your lighter color, just grab a little bit of your darker color and you can go and do any little touch-ups or... And you also don't have to follow the lines if you want to add any little extras here and there. So I'm just actually going to grab a little bit of white and just adding a little highlight here and there, just along the very tops. I'm just adding a little bit of white kind of just here and there, giving just a little bit of depth to the light gray I did. Also just gonna, while I'm doing this, grab a little bit of just pure black. And I'm just gonna add the odd little bit of shadow here and there. This is completely optional. This is just to add a few little bits here and there. And I'm just following along the natural lines that were engraved in, and so you can just find one of the little swoopy lines and just kind of follow it down. And it just adds a little bit of depth. Perfect. Awesome. So our background is looking pretty good. So I'm just gonna grab my second layer and I'm just gonna stack them just so I can make sure that I did actually get everything covered and everything's looking good. Perfect. So I'm gonna take my first layer here and I'm gonna set that aside to dry. And then while that one's drying, we can actually base coat our second little layer here. So for this one here, let's start with the trees, and I'm actually just going to use the green directly from the container here. It's called sap green, and it's a really nice rich green. And this is a good time, if you don't have a piece of paper below, to put one, just in case if you end up going over. As you can see, that I end up making a bit of a mess when I do my my base coating. And add little bits of water as you go, just to make it more fluid and we're just going to give this just a really good coat with this green. Yours won't have this little bit of a wood piece. I have I get to paint all the duds, so don't mind that extra little piece on mine. And then for the frame, you can paint it any color you would like. You could continue with your green and paint your frame green. I'm going to paint mine a different color, so I'm just going to kind of be a little bit mindful of that line, and I'm just going to bring my paint just right up to it. Once again, if you end up going over a little bit, no big deal, but I am just going to be mindful of that line, and we'll do a nice base coat on our frame after this. Once you get a good coat on that, we can just give our brush a good wash, and then we will paint the frame next. So a couple options is you could do it blue or light blue, or pull in some of your colors from your background. I think I'm just going to do mine just a standard black. I think it just looks nice and classic, but feel free to do your frame any color that you'd like. But I like how that the black does frame it up nicely. So when I'm going up against an edge here and I want to get a really crisp line, adding a little bit of water to your paint will help to make it more fluid. And then I actually use my brush and I just run it back and forth. So if you can see, you can get a pretty straight line by just going back and forth. So I start back here and I slowly go back and forth, and slowly inch towards that line. And then when you get there, just follow it along. And that's a good way to get a nice clean straight line when you're doing something large like this. And just a little bit of water. And then slowly inch your way towards it. Perfect. And just make sure you got a nice amount of coverage everywhere. And if you need to do a little bit of a second coat, you can just do that right away here. But it's a nice thick paint, so you do get pretty good coverage your first time. So the nice thing about acrylic is it dries so quickly. There's not a lot of downtime in between all your layers. Perfect. And once we have our base coat done on our second layer here, this one you just have to be a little bit careful just because we did paint everything. But if you can slowly pick it up without getting your hands too full of paint, and we'll just set that one aside to dry. And then while that's drying, we can actually do a base coat on all of our little extras here. So we have a lot of gray base coating that we're gonna have to do. I think I'll base coat this little one white, and then green for the trees, and then we got the little banner there. So I'm actually gonna start, I'm gonna start with white and just get this little one out of the way. So I'm just gonna grab another good amount of white and just set it on the side of my palette. And then just gonna give this a really good once over with the white. You might end up needing 2 coats of white just because it's such a light color. So if we start with this one, then we can give it another coat once we're done base coating. Once we're done base coating our other guys. So give him a good coat, and then I'm just gonna set it aside. Set it aside to dry. And then I'm gonna do green next. So I'm gonna want these 2 trees just to stand out from the trees that I just did. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna grab some of my green, and I'm just gonna place it over there. And I'm gonna mix in a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white. So I'm going to go with my really bright yellow here. And I'm just going to grab a small amount. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab a little bit of my white. So I have white and yellow, and then I'm going to slowly mix this green in. A little bit more green than that. And get just a nice tone that's going to stand out from that background green we did. Perfect. And then I'm just going to set these two aside as well. And then we have all of these little extras that are going to need to be painted for a base coat of just gray. So I'm going to mix quite a bit of gray. So I actually have a pretty good chunk of white here. I'm going to add just a little bit more to it. Perfect. And we're going to want to, I'm going to have to clean my brush again. Just grab out, I got a good chunk of black, but I'm going to leave it over here, and I'm just going to add what's on my brush. So I tried to scrape most of it off my brush, and I'm just going to start with that because I do want these actually to be a lighter gray, because all these little extras are what I want the main focus of the piece to be. So by doing that, you want to do it lighter than anything else on the piece is kind of the trick. So anything that you want to fade into the background, you do a darker color, and then anything you really want to stand out, you want to do it a little bit of a lighter tone. So, and that's actually a really nice. So if you can see the difference between the mountain gray and this gray, it's quite a bit lighter, and I like that. So go ahead and give all your little extras a nice base coat. And don't worry about covering up all these little engraved lines. When your paint dries, you're going to be able to see them nice and clear. So we'll be able to do all our shading and highlighting based on those little lines. just do any touch-ups once you're done your first coat if anything else needs a little bit of a touch-up here and there. Perfect. And lastly, we have our little banner here. Just make sure nothing's too wet below. And then for this, I actually I really like the natural wood. So I usually leave the background, but I am going to take the time to go inside of each of the lettering. For your banner, you feel free to leave it exactly like this. You could also just do a solid coat on top. And if you're careful and use just the side of your brush, you can actually leave the little engraved lines. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do the lettering, and I like this this medium brown that we did the mountains. So I'm just going to add water and get my brush. So if you roll your brush in the watery paint, you'll get a nice fine point, which will be good for doing all of this fine wording. And you don't have to use the banner, so if you're not going to use the banner in your final piece and you don't want to paint it, you can just fast forward right through this. But I think I am going to use my banner along the bottom of this one. This is just about patience and slowly going through. Perfect. And then I'm just going to come back and add another white coat to this one here. There's a little bit of soot residue on the side of all the wood pieces. So as that mixes in, you might get anything you try to paint pure white, you might get a little bit of a brown tone. So it's just coming in and adding a second coat will really give you that bright white color. Perfect. And then once you have everything base coated, I'm just gonna move these guys all to the side. Just gonna move that one. Oh, he's still a little bit wet. I want to make sure he's on the paper. So I'm gonna bring in my back layer and my second layer. And while those dry, we will work on our detail on our second layer here. So we're going to grab just a little bit of black, and I'm going to bring in some water and just water this down to make it just a little bit more translucent. So I can just show you on my paper here. It's still black, but it is quite watery. So it's when it dries, it's going to be almost like a dark gray. So once you get just a nice watery black, we're just going to follow along on the right side of the tree, and we're just going to use the edge of the brush. And we're just going to stipple along just the right sides of the trees and just kind of follow it down past where it would be. And just be careful with your back layer in and behind this. So you could actually take your back layer and just set it aside if you don't want to risk getting any paint on it, but just going to follow along. And this is just going to add just a little bit of detail to these trees in the background. And I always like to do my shadow on the right side, and I like to do my highlight on the left side. So I always imagine the sun kind of up in this corner. So anything on this side would be reflecting a shadow, and then anything coming from this direction, we would get the light. So once you have just like a little bit of detail kind of going on in there, I'm gonna add a little bit of a fake floor, as you will, on the bottom here. So I'm just gonna get this quite watery. And I'm just gonna kind of work that line back and forth. So I'm just kind of adding just a little bit, but this is completely optional. But just so there's a little bit of ground, and I'm gonna get all these little walkers so they're on the ground. And you could just kind of work work it back and forth and add it where you'd like it and kind of just fade out that shadow. Perfect. And then we're going to do what we just did with the black, but with a little bit of a lighter green. So looks like all my green has dried up. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of green, and I'm going to grab a little bit of white, and I'm just going to put it over there, and I'm going to slowly mix these two together. I want this to be quite watery as well. I don't want the lines on here to be really, really harsh. I just kind of want a little bit of subtle detail. So once you get a little bit of a watery light green, you can always come on here and test it. That's a little light still. So I'm just going to add a little bit more green. I want it to be lighter than this green here, but I don't want it to stand out, not too much. So yeah, that's very much what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to go along, and I'm just going to add a little bit of this, and I'm just using just the edge of my brush, and I'm just bouncing it off of the wood. And I'm going to go along and just add this all along to the left side of the trees. You can kind of just add in a little bit here and there wherever you would kind of like. So what this does, it really just creates depth with the tree. So we started with the medium color, and then you always go in with a darker color and then a lighter color, and that's what's going to give pretty much anything depth, is just the blending and the contrast between the three different tones of one color. That's how you make things look realistic. So once you're happy with your trees here, now it's time to have a little bit of fun with all of our extras. So it's just gonna be taking the time to decide what you want to include on your little background here. So whether you want to use the banner or just these guys. So yeah, take a few minutes and kind of play around where you'd like everything. And then this is just so you can take your time and really focus on the detail of the pieces you're going to use. I think I'm actually going to leave the little falcon out, and I think I'm going to leave the banner out, and I think I'm going to go with something like this. But have fun, get creative with this, and yeah, so those are the ones I'm going to use. So I'm just going to move both of these, as it's pulling my paper with it. Just going to move both of those aside, and then I'm going to pull all my little extras. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just quickly flip this around. There we go. And then you'll be able to see what I'm doing a little bit better. So all the extras that I'm going to use, I'm just going to pull onto here and add all my little details. I will do the detail on the little falcon here as well, just so you can see what we're working with. So with our little detail brush, the very first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna add the little bit of red detailing just to our little fighter here. So we got a little bit of red, and I'm gonna add just a touch of black to the red. Oh, I added a little too much black, so I'm gonna go grab a bit more red. We just want to make a nice rich red. Perfect. So adding just a touch of black just makes it a little bit deeper, which is quite nice. So I'm gonna go and just very carefully with my brush, I'm just gonna add just a touch on the little wings. Just there. And then I'm just gonna follow along. There's a little engraved line along the bottom here, and I'm just gonna very carefully run my brush along that line. Perfect. And that's really all we're looking for the red. So it's nice just to get that out of the way. And I just, my red came a little bit over, so if that happens to you, you can just grab a little bit of white and just touch it up. But yeah, don't worry too much about that. It's so small that all the little details are gonna cover up any little mistakes like that. So now I'm gonna take my really watery black. So as you can see here, I'm adding enough water, and just so I can, so it's quite watery, and I want it to be a translucent black. There we go, that you can see that a little bit better. So with your detail brush, water down your black until you have it nice and translucent for shading. And then we're just actually going to follow along all the little engraved lines. So just follow along the engraved lines. And that's really just going to start bringing out the detail. And then we can add more shading in once we know exactly where everything is. And I'm even following just along the edges of the wood as well, just to really start bringing out the shape. Sorry, I got a couple mosquitoes in here. If you can hear them buzzing around on the mic, I'm sorry. Okay, so, and just keep adding the right amount of water and black until you have this nice translucent with your brush. And we're actually going to just do this with every single piece. So you just, we're adding the paint just right onto those engraved lines. Nice and easy, just follow along them. And just keep dipping. You want to make sure you have a nice amount of the watery paint on your on your brush, just so you get nice flow. And we'll just continue to just follow along the engraved lines. And then with your little walkers here, once you've followed along all the engraved lines, there's a couple little extras that we can add in. So this little groove, the little groove that comes down in here, we can actually add a line connecting the two grooves. And we want to do that on all of the little legs. And then actually this little leg here and this leg here, so I'll just put some big black marks on them, those are actually behind the top two. So the ones that don't have the little engraved circles. So what we'll do is with this watery black, let's just paint those in solid, and that's going to make them look like they're behind the top two. So these two legs right in the middle, we'll just so then, yeah, once we have the back legs in shadow, there's a few little details we can add in. So the other one is connecting the line straight across here and then also straight across there. And then there's actually these little hinges kind of holding his foot on. So I like to just cover the middle with shadow and then just add these few little lines along the bottom. So on this side here, it's just connecting those two together and this together, and then just following along those lines and filling in the middle. And any little line details in here, you can just kind of add a few in. And then I just added just a line running parallel with the edge here. And I'm going to do the same thing over here where I'm just adding a little bit of a line running parallel. And that's looking pretty good. Awesome. And then you're just going to want to continue and do this with all your walkers. The biggest one has the most amount of detail, so once you get to these little ones, they're going to be so small that we won't be able to get that detailed, but follow along your engraved lines. And then also paint these back two legs so they are in shadow. And then just do the best you can following along all these little lines. And then you can add the same little details where you just kind of connect your lines. Where you connect your lines across. Awesome. And we're going to continue with all the little extras and just following along the engraved lines. With this little one here, the only difference is we're actually going to want to just fill in the triangles here with black paint. And you can make it watery black, or you can just do just black, whatever you'd prefer. Oh, mine's a little too watery. So I have just a little bit of water building up. So a nice little trick for that is you can actually just grab a little bit of paper towel and just soak up a little bit of that water. So I'm just gonna grab just a little more black paint, just so it's a little bit thicker and I don't get lots of water sitting on top of the wood like that. So with black paint, I'm just gonna paint in and you want to try to leave this tiny little bit of a detail dividing the triangles gray. If you do end up painting it over black right now, we can take our brush and we can add some little bit of gray paint. A little bit of gray paint in there afterwards, but do your best to leave that dividing them. And just take your time with your small brush. Adding a little bit of water as you go. And then we're just going to paint the very middle black as well. And then just follow along the engraved lines for the rest of that there. Perfect. So just following along the lines. And then a few little details that you can add onto this one here. I like to just add a little bit of a round curve and then some little horizontal lines connecting the two. And then really just filling in, oh, and then all along the edges. A little satellite here, you can add just a few little lines all connecting at the middle. And I'm just going to draw a little base onto that satellite, but here really you can just add as much or as little detail as you'd like. Even if you just do a base coat and follow the engraved lines, they still look perfect to decorate your piece, so only get as detailed as you'd like and as you're comfortable with. I just like to add a few little boxes here and there. And kind of following this little line all along the side. All along the side of it. And this one as well, I'm going to add a little bit of a checkered, just a little bit of a checkered detail. And then I'm going to add just a few other lines, really mimicking kind of that pizza slice line. I'm just going to add a few others kind of here and there. And a few little horizontal lines here. And a few here and there. And then right now my brush is really quite watery. So with it being like this is what we were working with before, like really quite watery, you can go in and you can just kind of run your brush along and you're just really adding a little bit of texture. So you want this to be very translucent. And just kind of run your brush over it. And we're really just trying to make sure it's not just completely a flat gray. It just adds a little bit of texture in there. And just makes it look like a little bit more roughed up and like it's been used. Perfect. And then just gonna start by following along our little engraved lines. And one thing I like to do is I follow along the engraved line and then also the one above and below all the little detail. It's just going to add just a little bit more interest. So feel free to really expand those lines beyond the engraving. And then I always start by just following along the lines. And then once you have everything kind of outlined here, I'm just gonna add a little bit of a darker shadow in there. In all of these little rectangles, you can go ahead and you can divide them into 4s. This one I'm going to divide into 6. just in half. So just really adding just a few little details here and there and just make it a little bit more interesting by just adding, almost like when you were a kid making windows on a drawing. So if this is our main rectangle, you can just divide it into 4 with a horizontal line and a vertical line. You can divide it into 8, and just going through and kind of varying each one into 2s, 4s, 8s, 6s. And I just like to kind of bounce around and divide this up and make it look like there's lots of little detail in the metal. And just go until you're happy. And we're still going to go through each one, and we're going to be adding little white highlights, and that's really going to bring this together and make it look realistic. So I'm just going to run my black line kind of all the way around as well, just adding a little bit of depth. And then with our middle here, I'm also going to just add a couple lines all intersecting in the middle, making this look, we're doing that little bit of a spider web or pizza shape on there. You just play around with all your little pieces. I like to just kind of take a step back and just bounce around between them, adding little bits of detail here and there. I'm going to add a little bit of a black dot into each one of these circles at the back as well. So those are looking pretty good. And then with our trees, we're actually going to do the same thing we did on our back piece. So I'm going to get my big brush again. But instead of doing it with black, I'm actually going to do it just with this pure green. Because we made a little bit of a lighter green, our pure green is going to look quite a bit darker. So we don't want to go black. We want to, just add a little bit of detail into this. So really focusing on that right side and just kind of bringing that up and over. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one. And then we're going to go ahead and mix. So if we have enough green there, we're going to grab some of our white. And we do want this to be quite light. So we want this to be, just have a peek there. Yeah, that's actually really nice. And we're going to do, I'm just bouncing our brush on it to kind of give it a nice texture. And I focus mostly on the left, but you can bring it all the way over and just kind of play around with it there. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab more white, and I want to mix a very light green. And with this, I'm just going to use the very edges of my brush there, and just very lightly bounce them. So I want this one to be quite subtle, and just adding just one top layer. So with the edge of my brush, and you can kind of practice the little bouncing motion, you want just a little bit of paint hitting. And don't worry if you don't end up getting this the first time. Use some green, add a little bit more darker green. So if you end up going a little too much, all you have to do is grab your green and you can just do the same thing and tone down your white. So if you go and there's just a little too much for you, you can very easily tone this down and just bounce your brush along and experiment with lighter and darker and different tones of green, and you can really give these a nice texture and make them look like they're bristly and realistic. So I'm just gonna go back and just add a little bit more of the lighter. Perfect. And then with our small detail brush, we're gonna go and we're gonna grab, I'm gonna put just a nice amount of white onto my palette there. And with this, I'm gonna go in and just add some highlights onto all of the pieces here. So this one here, my white stands out against kind of the gray that the little X-wing ended up here. So this is actually pretty perfect. And I'm just kind of bouncing around and adding little bits of white highlight on any wide open area. And that's kind of what you're going to be doing on all your little pieces. So on the little TIE fighter here, I'm going to add just a little bit more water. And then I got a little bit of black paint in my lines, so I'm going to, with my brush and a little bit of water, I'm just going to run it along in between the black. And then I'm just going to follow along and just cleaning up my little lines through there. And then I'm also going to add this little bit of white just along the very top and the very bottom. And then on this side as well, just in between the black. And I'm also going to get just my edges. Just very carefully running my brush along to get my edges there. And then I'm just going to use a little bit of white and just kind of follow that curve up. Perfect, and that's looking pretty good. And just add just a few little drops here and there. That's looking pretty good. Now when it comes to your little walkers here, we're going to do the same highlights on all of them, so I'll just line them all up here. So I'm going to follow along on the right side of some of my engraved lines here. So just on the inside of this one here, I'm just going to bring my white paint. I'm also going to run it along the top. But I'm really just going to run it along the side and add this highlight in. And then just adding in, just like we did with the black, any little white highlights. So I'm going just along the tops and kind of around the sides. I'm going to add a little bits into the circles. And I'm also going to add this just along the left side of the leg. And I'm only going to do it on the 2 legs that are in the front. And then I'm going to make sure that this the little visor, just the middle one has a nice white line right there. So I'm definitely favoring the left side of most of the things, because that's where our sun is going to be coming from. And just adding a little line of white anywhere that and those guys are looking pretty good. Just gonna set them aside and bring down. And I just like to bounce back and forth kind of between all the little extras. So this one here, keeping the left side in mind, I'm gonna add a little white highlight kind of going all along the left top there. And then all those kind of little windows we made, I'm just gonna add little bits of highlight, and I'm gonna stick to the middle. So thinking of just an orb, the outside would be in shadow, where the middle would kind of be the most likely to have a reflection. So I just kind of followed along the middle, and I'm just gonna add and kind of work my way out. Just little dots of white, little lines of white, and just alternating, just kind of like we did with the little windows. Just alternating. Adding little dots of white is a really great way to make this look interesting and like there's lots of little things going along. So I just kind of use the edge of my brush and just dab a few little spots everywhere, and just really making it look like there's lots going on. And that's looking pretty good. Perfect. And just following along my black lines, and also favoring the left top side Just adding a little bit of highlight here and there. You can add a little bit of, so thinking of this as one circular piece, you can kind of add a few little lines kind of following that circular motion and just adding a few little details here and there. And same that we just did with the little bit of a speck of white here and there can just make it look like there's little lights on or little reflections of little pieces of machinery. Can just make it look a little bit more interesting as well. Awesome. So once you kind of once you're looking happy with all your little pieces, just gonna add a little bit more here and there on this one. But once you're happy with your pieces, we can start with kind of piling everything on, and then we can add our final little detail once we have everything all layered up, just so you see where everything's going and if anything else needs just a little bit more detail. So I'm just gonna bring my back 2 layers and just taking my time getting all my little guys where I want them. I'm gonna do the 2 trees. And then and this one here can actually is reversible, so you can have it this way, but you can also have it this way. So whatever makes the most sense for your little battle. And I'm thinking I'm gonna go something like this. So at this point, I just like to get my black and my white paint. And just do a little bit of touch up with my highlights. So I like using the edge of my brush with my white and just going along all of the edges here and just really making him stand out against the background. So I'm just rubbing my brush. But this is where you can really get creative and make your piece your own by adding any little final details. I'm actually going to add just a little bit of highlight on these back legs as well. And I'm going to do into the trees. But adding just this little bit of a white final highlight along the edges is just really going to make them pop and look like they're the furthest thing out. And so once you're happy with where everything is, we are gonna do our final step of gluing. So I have everything where I want it. So I'm actually just going to add a little pencil line just where I want some of these things to sit, just so I don't have to play around. I think I'm good with where those were. Too much once we pull them all off. So once you're ready to glue, I'm just gonna take all my little guys, move them over here, and then I just put, little pencil lines so I kind of know where my everything in the sky went. We're gonna take our second layer and flip it over. And with your popsicle stick here, we're just gonna dip it into the wood glue. And you don't need a lot of glue. It's a really strong, good quality wood glue. So you don't want to put globs and globs, because as you put the two layers together, glue will actually squeeze out of all the little nooks and crannies. So I'm just going to get a nice amount in this large area here, but yeah, you just want just a nice thin layer, nothing too crazy. And then carefully follow along, and we're going to want a little bit on the frame going all the way around just to make sure that this all stays in place. And I'm going to keep my little tabs free of glue, just so I don't interfere with the string going through there at all. So perfect, that looks like a nice amount. So I'm just going to set my glue aside. And then when attaching these two, we're just going to want to go nice and slow and very carefully line them up. And these little tabs for hanging are a good place to make sure everything is all in line, and then apply some pressure. And then if you do get any little bits of glue seeping out like me there, just give your flat brush a really good wash and make sure there's no paint on it. And you want it to be just a little bit damp. You can actually just run the wet brush along that seam. And just to pick up any little bits of glue. Perfect. And then just give it a good wash afterwards. And then just gonna go along my pencil lines and just get these guys all back into position. And then just one by one, add your glue and press them into place. And if you have any little bit of seepage with the glue, just make sure your brush is clean. And you can just give it a quick clean. The glue does dry like a clear yellowy. So if you do end up getting any little bits of glue that are dried, it's quite easy just to add a little bit of paint over top and touch up later. So. And your little one works, your little brush works as well, especially when you're working in tiny little nooks and crevices. And just, yeah, make sure you give it a good clean afterwards, or your bristles will glue themselves into the last position it was in. And I'm just gonna go just on the body. The legs, there's just a few, just like a small amount to glue there. So versus risking getting glue everywhere, I'm just gonna put a little bit of glue on the body. And touch up any little spots. Perfect. And then you're going to want to let this dry and set overnight before you hang it. But I will just tie the string to show you what it looks like. But you will want to let this set for, I would say, 24 hours. Let it set overnight before you hang it up. So we got our little cotton macrame cord here. So there is some pretty cool things if you look up online. There's some pretty fun ways that you can tie this cord. The edges make really nice tassels because of the way it's cut, but I'm just gonna string mine through the little hangers. Take my two ends together, and I'm just gonna tie these in a knot together, just like that. But feel free to get creative and tie yours any way you'd like. And then I'm just gonna break these ends up and make a cute little tassel. A cute little tassel here. And you can use your scissors and you can trim this, or you can just leave it like that there. And then you can line both of them up, and then just with a little tack or a hook in the wall, this one is all ready to hang. Awesome. And that is our Galaxy Far, Far Away kit. Well, thanks for painting along with me. I hope you had fun, and we'll see you next week.